Water dripped through 3 different holes in the ceiling, each one hitting a different bucket with its own rhythm. Pip pressed herself against the back corner of her shelter where the metal panels still kept the rain out. Her green scales were already damp from earlier when she had tried to move one of the buckets and misjudged the angle. The storm outside wasn't even that bad compared to last week, but her roof kept getting worse. She wrapped her wings tighter around her body. They were still small, barely useful for gliding, let alone real flight. At least they kept some warmth. The shelter shook when wind hit it hard, and Pip wondered how many more storms it could take before the whole thing came apart. She had built it herself 2 years ago from scraps she found at the colony dump. Back then she thought she had done a good job. Now she knew better. The biggest bucket was almost full. Pip stood up and carefully lifted it, trying not to spill any water on the dirt floor. That would turn into mud. She pushed open the door made from an old cargo container panel and dumped the water. Outside, rain immediately soaked her head and shoulders. She ducked back inside and set the bucket under the drip. Again, 3 more hours until her shift at the dump started. She could try to sleep, but the constant dripping made that hard. Instead, she sat on her sleeping mat and looked at the technical manual she had found yesterday. The pages were water damaged and some words were too smudged to read, but she could still make out most of the diagrams. It showed how to repair atmospheric processors. Pip traced the connection lines with one claw, memorizing the patterns. If she could learn enough, maybe someday she could get a real job, not just picking through garbage for metal scraps and broken components. Real engineering work where she used her brain instead of just her strong back. But that was a dream for dragons who had citizenship papers and family connections. Pip had neither. She heard footsteps outside, splashing through puddles, probably someone heading to the early shift at the water plant. Most humans who lived in the fringe district ignored her. A few threw rocks or yelled insults about dangerous lizards who should go back where they came from. Pip had learned to keep her head down and stay out of their way. The footsteps stopped near her shelter. Pip's muscles tensed. She moved closer to the door, ready to defend her home if needed. Her claws weren't long yet, but they were sharp enough. A knock on the metal door made her jump. Nobody knocked. People either ignored her or caused trouble, but they never knocked like she was a normal person. "Hello," a male voice called out. "I'm your neighbor from the prefab unit next door. Name's Danny." Pip knew who he meant. She had seen him walking past her shelter almost every day for months. He wore the blue coveralls of a maintenance worker and always carried a lunchbox covered in dents. He had never bothered her before. "Why start now? What do you want?" Pip called back, trying to make her voice sound tough. "I noticed your roof's been leaking pretty bad. Thought maybe I could help fix it." Pip's first thought was that this was some kind of trick. Humans didn't help dragons for free. There was always a catch, always some price to pay later. "I don't need help," she said. "Okay," Danny said. He didn't sound angry or insulted, just accepting. "But if you change your mind, I live right next door. The offer stands." His footsteps walked away. Pip waited a full minute before cracking the door open to look. The man was gone already, disappearing into the rain toward the main road. She closed the door and sat back down. Another drip started, this one right Above her sleeping mat, Pip groaned and moved the mat to a drier spot. She only had 2 buckets left that weren't already catching water. At this rate she would run out of dry places to put them. The technical manual's pages were getting damp from humidity. Pip carefully closed it and wrapped it in the plastic sheet she used to protect her few possessions. She thought about the human's offer. Danny, he had said. His name was. It would be stupid to trust him. Every time she had trusted someone in this colony, she had been disappointed or hurt. But the roof really was falling apart. Another few storms and she might not have a shelter at all. The salvage work barely paid enough for food. She had no credit saved for repairs or new materials. If the shelter collapsed completely, she would have nowhere to go. Pip looked up at the ceiling where water ran along the metal seams before finding cracks to drip through. She had tried to patch the holes herself with sealant she found at the dump, but it never lasted. The sealant was old and dried out. Probably why someone threw it away in the first place. She needed proper materials and someone who actually knew how to do this kind of work. The rain got heavier, drumming loud against the metal panels. 2 more drips started and Pip had no more buckets. She watched water hit the dirt floor and start forming puddles. Her sleeping mat was going to get soaked soon no matter where she moved it. Maybe she could at least talk to the human, just talk, nothing more. See what he really wanted. Pip had survived 2 years in this colony by being careful and suspicious. She could be careful and suspicious while also finding out if this Danny person was genuine or just another person who would use her and throw her away. Tomorrow, she decided, after her shift at the dump, she would go knock on his door just to talk. That wasn't the same as trusting him. Pip's claws scraped against the metal door of the prefab unit. She pulled her hand back quickly, worried she had been too loud. Inside she could hear movement, then footsteps approaching. The door opened and the human from yesterday stood there, still wearing his work coveralls. "Hi," Danny said. He smiled but didn't move closer, giving her space. "You're Pip, right? I've seen you heading to the dump site." She nodded stiffly. Up close he looked older than she first thought, maybe 40 years. His hands had old scars from working with tools. There were grease stains on his coveralls that hadn't washed out. "I thought about what you said yesterday," Pip began, then stopped. This was harder than she expected. Asking for help felt like admitting weakness. "About the roof?" "Yeah." Danny leaned against the door frame, casual and relaxed. "Changed your mind?" "Maybe. What do you want in return?" The question hung in the air between them. Danny's eyebrows went up slightly, like he was surprised she asked. "Nothing," he said. "I'm a maintenance guy. I fix things, that's what I do." "Nobody does something for nothing," Pip said. She kept her voice flat and hard. "Everyone wants something." Danny was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair enough. You've probably got good reasons to think that way." He crossed his arms, thinking, "Okay, here's the truth. I grew up poor on Earth, real poor, lived in a place kind of like the fringe district, maybe worse, and I remember what it felt like when people just walked past problems they could fix because helping wasn't their job or wasn't convenient or whatever excuse they told themselves." He looked directly at Pip. "I also Remember the few people who did help, who didn't want anything except maybe to make things a little less hard for someone else. Those people saved my life more than once, so now I try to be one of them when I can, that's all. Pip studied his face, looking for signs of lying. Her mother had taught her how to read faces before the war scattered their clan. Humans were harder to read than dragons, but she had learned some of their tells. Danny's eyes didn't shift away. His shoulders were relaxed. He seemed to mean what he said. I can't pay you, Pip said quietly. Didn't ask you to. I don't have food to share or anything valuable. Don't need it. Danny straightened up. Look, how about this? Let me come take a look at your roof. Just look, nothing else. I'll tell you what it needs and you can decide if you want me to fix it or not. No pressure either way. That seemed safer. Just looking couldn't hurt anything. Pip nodded. Okay, when? Now works for me if you're free, Danny said. Let me grab my tools. He disappeared inside and came back, carrying a toolbox that looked as old and battered as Pip's shelter. They walked the short distance to her place. Not talking, Pip felt nervous having him see where she lived. The shelter was ugly and poorly made, obvious work of someone who didn't know what they were doing, but Danny didn't make any comments. He just walked around the outside first, looking at how the panels connected. Mind if I climb up? He asked. Go ahead. Danny set down his toolbox and pulled himself onto the roof. Pip heard his boots carefully moving across the metal panels. He was quiet for several minutes, and she fought the urge to ask what he was seeing. Finally he climbed back down, brushing rust flakes off his coveralls. Okay, here's the situation, Danny said, and his voice was serious but not mean. The panels are old and thin. They've rusted through in multiple places. Seams where they connect aren't sealed properly, so water's getting in even where there aren't holes yet, and some of your support beams underneath are starting to bow from the weight when it rains. Pip's wings drooped. She had known it was bad, but hearing it listed out made it sound worse. Can it be fixed? She asked. Yeah, definitely, but it needs more than patches. You need new panels for the worst sections, proper sealant for the seams, and I should reinforce those support beams before they bend too far. Danny pulled a small notebook from his pocket and started writing. I can get most of what we need from the salvage yard at the water plant. They throw out old panels that still have good life in them. I'll need to buy sealant, but that's not expensive. Pip asked. Well, it's your shelter. Figured you'd want to help with the work. Danny looked up from his notebook. Unless you'd rather not, which is also fine. Something loosened in Pip's chest. He was including her, treating this like they were working together instead of him doing charity while she stood aside, feeling useless. I want to help, she said. I should know how to do this anyway. Good, it'll go faster with two people. Danny tore the page from his notebook and handed it to her. Here's the materials list. I can probably get everything together by tomorrow after work. Would late afternoon work for you? Pip looked at the list. The handwriting was clear and easy to read. He had drawn little diagrams next to some items, showing how they would be used. I work at the dump until mid-afternoon. After that, I'm free. Perfect, I'll come by around 4:00. Danny picked up his toolbox, and Pip. It's going to be okay. This is fixable. Nothing here is too far gone. He walked back to his unit, and Pip stood holding the materials list. The paper felt important in her hands, like a promise written down. She went back inside her shelter where water still dripped into buckets, but somehow the dripping didn't sound as hopeless as it had yesterday. Danny showed up exactly at 4:00, carrying metal panels under one arm and a bag of supplies in the other. Pip helped him unload everything next to her shelter. The panels were scratched and dented, but solid, better than anything she could have found at the dump. "Okay, safety first," Danny said. Pulling out 2 pairs of work gloves, he handed one pair to Pip. "Metal edges are sharp. Also, if I tell you to move or hold something, I need you to do it right away, understood?" Pip nodded and pulled on the gloves. They were too big for her claws, but better than nothing. "I'll start by removing the worst panels. Up top, you hand me the new ones when I'm ready." Danny climbed onto the roof, and Pip watched him work. He moved carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. The first damaged panel came off with a screech of protesting metal. "This one's completely rusted through," Danny called down. "Probably been leaking for months." "Longer," Pip admitted. "I tried to patch it, but the sealant wouldn't stick. Can't seal rust, it just keeps spreading underneath." Danny set the old panel aside and reached down. "Okay. Hand me that first new panel. Careful. Watch your wings on the edges." Pip lifted the panel, surprised by how heavy it was. She angled it up, and Danny took it, positioning it over the gap. He pulled out a drill and started securing it in place. The sound was loud and sharp, and Pip's ears flattened against her head. "Sorry, should have warned you," Danny said, noticing her reaction. He finished the last bolt, and the noise stopped. "You okay?" "I'm fine, just loud." They worked through the afternoon, Danny removing old panels and installing new ones while Pip handed him materials and tools. He explained each step as he went, showing her how to align the panels so water would run off instead of pooling, how to space the bolts evenly so weight distributed properly, which sealant worked best for metal-to-metal joints. Pip absorbed every word, asking questions when something wasn't clear. Danny never acted like her questions were stupid. He just answered them, sometimes stopping to draw diagrams in the dirt to make things clearer. "You picked this up fast," Danny said. During a water break, he sat on the edge of the roof, feet dangling. "Ever thought about doing maintenance work?" "I'm not qualified for anything except dump salvage. Qualification is just a fancy word for experience. You've got good hands and you learn quick. That's what matters in maintenance." Pip looked at her claws, still wearing the oversized gloves. "Most places won't hire dragons. They think we're too aggressive or unpredictable." Danny frowned. "That's ignorant thinking. I've worked with all kinds of people from all kinds of species. Jerks and good folks come in every shape. Your species doesn't determine your character. Try telling that to the colony administration." "Yeah, I know." Danny took another drink of water. "But things change slowly." "Maybe, but they change. 10 years ago, they wouldn't hire humans like me for skilled work either. We were just grunt labor. Now I'm senior maintenance at the water plant." He looked at Pip thoughtfully. "Actually, we've got a position opening up, just sorting recyclables and identifying valuable Components, but it pays better than the dump and there's room to move up. You interested? Pip's heart jumped. You think they'd hire me? I can put in a word. My supervisor's fair-minded. If I vouch for you, he'll at least give you a chance. Danny stood up and brushed off his coveralls. Think about it, no pressure. They went back to work. The sun was setting by the time they finished installing all the new panels. Danny climbed down and started mixing the sealant while Pip held the bucket. Steady. Now comes the important part, he said. We seal every seam, every edge, everywhere water might sneak through. This takes patience. Rush it and you'll have leaks again in a month. Danny showed her how to apply the sealant in smooth, even lines, how much pressure to use, how to tool it into the joint so it bonded properly. Then he handed her the applicator. You do this section, I'll watch and correct if needed. Pip's hand shook slightly as she started. The first line came out wobbly and uneven. Danny reached over and guided her hand, showing her the rhythm. The next line was better. By the third section, she was doing it without help. That's perfect, Danny said. See? Natural talent. They worked into the evening, sealing every seam. Danny set up a work light so they could see properly. Finally, as full dark settled over the colony, they finished the last joint. Danny checked over everything twice, running his fingers along each seal to make sure it was solid. That should do it, he said. We'll know for sure next time it rains, but I'm confident this will hold. Pip looked up at her roof. It looked different now, patched but sturdy. More importantly, she understood how it worked. If something went wrong in the future, she could fix it herself. Thank you, she said quietly. The words felt inadequate for what he had done, but she didn't know what else to say. You're welcome. Danny started packing up his tools. And Pip, think about that job offer. You've got skills going to waste at the dump. Come by tomorrow evening and I'll give you the details if you want them. After he left, Pip went inside her shelter. It felt different somehow, more solid. She lay on her sleeping mat and looked up at the ceiling. No drips, no water running along the seams, just solid metal panels keeping the weather out like they were supposed to. For the first time in months, Pip felt something unfamiliar. It took her a moment to recognize what it was. Hope. The feeling that maybe things could get better instead of just harder, that maybe she didn't have to do everything alone. She fell asleep listening to silence instead of dripping water and dreamed of work that used her brain instead of just her back. Pip stood outside the water processing plant's main entrance, trying to steady her breathing. She had worn her cleanest shirt and spent an hour scrubbing dirt from under her claws. Danny had set up the interview for this morning, and now she was terrified of wasting the chance. A human woman walked past and gave Pip a wide berth, gripping her bag tighter. Pip was used to that reaction, but it still stung. She forced herself to walk through the entrance doors. The lobby was clean and bright, nothing like the dump where she usually worked. A receptionist looked up, and her eyes widened slightly at seeing a dragon. I have an appointment, Pip said quickly, with Mr. Chen. Danny Reeves arranged it. The receptionist checked her screen. Oh yes, Pip, correct. Go through that door and down the hall, third office on the left. Mr. Chen turned out to be a tired-looking man with gray hair and permanent frown lines. He gestured for Pip to sit, and she perched carefully on the edge of the chair. Danny speaks highly of you, Mr. Chen said, looking at a data pad. Says, you're a fast learner with good technical instincts. That true? I try to be, sir. The position is in our recycling division. You'd sort through plant waste, identify valuable or reusable components, process them according to type. It's repetitive work but requires attention to detail. He looked up at her. You'd be working with a mixed crew. Humans, 2 Centaurians, 1 Rigelian. Any problems with that? No, sir, I just want to work. Mr. Chen studied her for a long moment. I'll be honest with you, I've never hired a dragon before. Some of my staff might be uncomfortable at first, but Danny's been with me for 8 years and his judgment is usually solid. I'm willing to give you a trial period, 2 weeks, if you prove yourself reliable and capable. The position is yours permanently. Fair? More than fair, thank you. Start tomorrow, 6:00 in the morning. Danny will show you the ropes. Pip left the office trying not to show how relieved she felt. A real job. Steady pay. Chance to prove herself. She found Danny in the maintenance section, elbow deep in some kind of pump mechanism. Got the job, she told him. Danny's face split into a genuine smile. Knew you would. Chen's tough but fair. Show him what you can do and you'll be fine. The next morning, Pip arrived 15 minutes early. Danny met her at the recycling division entrance and handed her a work vest with safety pockets. Okay, basics first. This is the sorting floor. He led her into a large room filled with conveyor belts and sorting stations. Materials come in mixed. You separate them by type and condition. Metals here, plastics here, electronic components here. Anything you're not sure about goes in the uncertain bin and I'll check it later. He showed her how to operate the sorting controls, how to identify different material types and which components had resale value versus recycling value. Pip paid attention to everything, occasionally asking questions to clarify. You'll be working with Ellis initially, Danny said, gesturing to a Centaurian who was already at a sorting station. He's been here 3 years, good guy. Ellis looked up as they approached. He was tall and thin with the typical forearms of his species. His expression was cautious but not hostile. This is Pip, Danny said, starting today. Dragon, huh? Ellis's voice was neutral. Can you handle fine motor work or just heavy lifting? Pip felt her scales prickle at the assumption but kept her voice level. I can do detailed work. My claws are precise. We'll see. Ellis didn't sound convinced. Start with that pile. Separate the circuit boards from the casing. Materials. Danny squeezed Pip's shoulder reassuringly and left. Pip moved to the indicated pile and started working. The circuit boards were mixed with plastic housings and metal brackets. She worked carefully, using her claws to separate components without damaging them. Ellis watched from his station without comment. After an hour, he came over to inspect her work. Acceptable, he said, which Pip sensed was high praise from him. You didn't crack any boards. Most new workers break at least 2. Over the following days, Pip settled into the work rhythm. It was repetitive but satisfying, using her eyes and hands instead of just hauling weight. She learned quickly which components were valuable, which were just scrap, and how to maximize recovery from mixed waste. Some of the human workers kept their distance, but others warmed up. Gradually, Ellis remained professionally distant, but fair, occasionally giving her tips on spotting quality components. The real test came on her fourth day. Sorting machine jammed, backing up the entire line. The human technician on duty couldn't figure out the problem. Pip watched him struggle for several minutes before carefully approaching. "Excuse me," she said, "may I look?" The technician, whose name badge read Sam, looked doubtful. "You know machines?" "Some. I used to study technical manuals." Sam stepped back with a shrug. Pip examined the jam carefully. A metal bracket had bent and caught on the conveyor track. Simple problem, but in an awkward location. She used her smaller claws to reach into the mechanism and carefully bent the bracket back into position. The machine immediately resumed working. The backed-up material started flowing through again. Sam stared at her. "That was actually impressive. I couldn't reach that spot properly." "Different hand size helps sometimes," Pip said, trying not to show how pleased she felt. Word spread quickly. The dragon fixed the jam that stumped the technician. By lunch break, people who had avoided her were nodding hello. Ellis actually sat near her in the break room. "Not bad," he said, which Pip was learning was Ellis's version of high praise. "Where'd you learn about machine repair?" "Salvage work. You see a lot of broken equipment, you learn what goes wrong." "Waste of skills at the dump." Ellis bit into his meal. "Plant could use someone good with repairs. Once you finish probation, you should ask about maintenance training." It was the first time anyone besides Danny had suggested she could advance beyond basic sorting. Pip felt warmth spread through her chest. That evening she went home to her shelter with its solid roof and no leaks. She had credits in her account from her first week's pay, real credits earned through skilled work. Danny waved from his unit as she passed, and Pip waved back. Small changes, but they added up to something bigger. A life that felt less like just surviving and more like actually living. The colony's emergency system woke everyone at 3:00 in the morning with a harsh blaring sound. Pip jerked awake and scrambled for her communicator, reading the scrolling message with growing fear. Severe weather alert, Category 4 storm approaching. All residents in low-lying areas must evacuate to designated shelters immediately. This is not a drill. She pulled on her clothes with shaking hands. Category 4 meant serious danger. Her shelter's roof might hold against normal rain, but winds strong enough to tear apart buildings were different. She grabbed her small bag of important possessions and stepped outside. The fringe district was already chaotic. People rushed around loading vehicles or carrying belongings. The wind was picking up, pushing against Pip hard, enough to make her spread her wings for balance. She saw Danny's door open and felt a rush of relief. "Pip," Danny called over the wind, "I'm heading to the main evacuation shelter. Come with me." She ran to his unit. "They'll let me in there." "They have to. Emergency protocols guarantee shelter access to all residents." Danny was throwing supplies into a backpack. "But we need to move now. Storm's coming faster than predicted." They joined the stream of people heading toward higher ground. The main shelter was a reinforced structure built into the hillside. As they approached, Pip saw the crowd bottlenecking at the entrance where Colony security was checking IDs and directing traffic. When they reached the checkpoint, a security officer held up his hand. ID and residential status. Pip handed over her identification card. The officer scanned it and frowned. Non-citizen refugee status. You need to go to the auxiliary facility, he pointed toward a large warehouse structure in the distance. That's the designated overflow shelter. That's not a proper shelter, Danny said. Sharply, it's a warehouse with minimal reinforcement. It's designated for non-citizens and temporary residents. Main shelter is for registered colony citizens only. Pip felt her stomach sink. She had known this might happen. Colony regulations always found ways to separate dragons and other undesirables. The emergency protocols don't differentiate by citizenship, Danny said, his voice hard. They guarantee shelter access to all residents during disasters. The protocols also allow facility managers to direct traffic for optimal capacity management. The officer's tone was firm. The auxiliary facility is adequate for the storm rating. Like hell it is. Danny moved to stand beside Pip. Either she comes into the main shelter with me, or you can explain to your supervisor why you violated Emergency Protocol Section 12. Other evacuees were backing up behind them, grumbling about the delay. The officer looked frustrated. Sir, I'm just following procedures. Your procedures are going to get someone killed. A new voice joined the conversation. An elderly human woman stepped forward from the crowd. Young man, I've lived through 6 colony disasters, and I know those auxiliary facilities. They're death traps in Category 4 winds. Let the girl through. Ma'am, please stay back. I will not. The woman, whose name badge identified her as Ruth, crossed her arms. I'm a 30-year colony resident and I'm telling you this is wrong. That dragon has as much right to safety as anyone here. More voices joined in. Someone Pip recognized as Ellis pushed forward. She works at the water plant, Ellis said loudly. She's a colony employee. That makes her a resident by any reasonable definition. The crowd's mood was shifting. People were getting cold and wet while the officer argued. The security supervisor hurried over to see what was causing the delay. What's the problem? She demanded. This refugee needs to go to auxiliary shelter, the officer said. That warehouse isn't safe, Ruth said firmly. You know it and I know it. Stop playing games with people's lives. The supervisor looked at the growing crowd, at the worsening weather, and at Pip standing there trying to look small and unthreatening. She made a decision. Let her through. We don't have time for this. The officer stepped aside reluctantly. Danny put a hand on Pip's shoulder and guided her past the checkpoint. Inside, the main shelter was crowded but organized. Cots lined the walls and emergency supplies were stacked in the center. Danny found them a spot near the back. Thank you, Pip said quietly. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, I did. Danny set down his backpack. That bureaucratic nonsense could have gotten you killed. Ruth came over and sat on the cot next to theirs. Don't mention it, dear. I've seen too many good people hurt by stupid rules. You work at the water plant? Yes, ma'am. Recycling division. Hard work. My late husband worked there for 20 years. Ruth pulled out a thermos and poured hot tea. Want some? Over the next several hours, as the Storm battered the shelter. Pip found herself talking with Ruth and others. Nearby, a family with young children asked about her. Wings curious rather than afraid. Children wanted to touch her scales and Pip let them, careful to keep her claws retracted. During a particularly violent gust that shook even the main shelter, the emergency lights flickered. People murmured nervously. Then someone called out that the backup generator was having problems. Pip stood up immediately. "I can look at it," she said. The shelter manager, a hurried-looking Rigelian, led her to the generator room. The machine was sputtering and threatening to quit. Pip examined it quickly, recognizing a fuel line connection that had worked loose from vibrations. "I need a wrench and some sealant tape," she said. She worked fast, tightening the connection and reinforcing it. The generator stabilized and the lights stopped flickering. The manager looked at her with surprise. "Where did you learn generator repair?" "Technical manuals and watching maintenance workers." Word spread that the Dragon had fixed the generator. People who had eyed her warily earlier now nodded thanks. One of the children brought her a ration bar to share. Ellis gave her a rare smile. As the storm raged outside, Pip sat between Danny and Ruth, drinking hot tea and listening to people tell stories to pass the time. She was still just a refugee with non-citizen status. She still lived in a scrap shelter in the poorest part of the colony. But right now, in this moment, she was part of a community that had stood up for her and welcomed her in. The storm couldn't touch that. Equals. When the all-clear sounded 18 hours later, Pip walked back to the fringe district with heavy dread. The storm had been worse than predicted. Even from a distance, she could see the devastation. Trees were down, debris scattered everywhere, and some structures had collapsed completely. Her shelter was gone, just twisted metal and scattered pieces where it used to stand. Pip stood staring at the wreckage, feeling numb. Everything she had worked for, the roof Danny had helped repair, all destroyed in one night. Danny's prefab unit was still standing, but had damage to one wall and the windows were blown out. He surveyed his place with a tired expression, then turned to Pip. "You okay?" Pip nodded, not trusting her voice. She wasn't hurt physically, but looking at the destruction of her home made something crack inside her chest. "Come on," Danny said gently. "Help me clear the glass and secure the windows. Then we'll figure out what to do next." They worked together, boarding up the broken windows with salvaged materials. Other neighbors were doing the same, calling out to each other about damage and offering help. Ruth stopped by with food from the emergency supplies, making sure everyone had something to eat. When they finished securing Danny's unit, he turned to Pip. "You'll stay here while you rebuild. The spare room's small, but it's dry and safe. I can't impose like that." "You're not imposing, you're accepting help from a friend." Danny's voice was firm. "And before you argue about paying rent, you can contribute to utilities. Once you're settled, fair." Pip wanted to refuse to maintain her independence, but standing in the wreckage of her shelter, she realized independence didn't mean doing everything alone. It meant being strong enough to accept help when needed and giving help when you could. "Fair," she agreed quietly. Living with Danny was strange at first. Pip had lived alone since arriving at the colony, but Danny was easy to share space with. He kept to himself in the mornings. Before work and evenings they often sat together reading or working on small repair projects. He taught Pip more about maintenance, work, and she shared what she'd learned about component identification from the plant. 3 weeks after the storm, Mr. Chen called Pip into his office. "I've been impressed with your work," he said without preamble. "The way you handled that generator during the evacuation and how quickly you've mastered the sorting systems. I'm offering you a spot in our technical training program. It's a 6-month course in maintenance and repair. You'd keep working part-time while learning, and after completion, you'd move into a full maintenance position." Pip felt her wings twitch with excitement. "I'd need to apply for it." "I'm offering it directly. Danny recommended you, and your work speaks for itself." Mr. Chen handed her a data pad with program information. "Think it over, but I'll need an answer by next week." Pip didn't need a week. She accepted immediately. The training program was challenging, but exactly what she dreamed about. She learned electrical systems, mechanical repair, structural maintenance, and emergency protocols. Her instructors were surprised by how much she already knew from her technical manual reading and work with Danny. Some trainees were uncomfortable working with a dragon at first, but Pip's competence won them over. She helped struggling classmates, shared her notes, and proved herself reliable in every practical exercise. 6 months later, Pip passed her final exams with the highest scores in her class. She was officially a certified maintenance technician. Danny took her out to celebrate at a small restaurant in the better part of the colony, where the waiter only hesitated a moment before seating them. "Told you," Danny said, raising his drink. "You've got talent, just needed the opportunity to use it." With her new position came better pay. Pip started saving credits seriously for the first time. She had a goal now, a real home built properly, something that could stand up to storms. She worked with Danny to design it, incorporating lessons learned from his roof repair and her maintenance training. They picked a spot near his prefab unit. Over the following months, with help from Ellis, Ruth, and other friends from the plant, the structure took shape. It was small but well built, with a properly engineered roof that could handle Category 5 winds. The walls were insulated, the windows sealed correctly, and the foundation was solid. Pip did most of the work herself, with Danny supervising and helping with the tricky parts. The day they installed the final roof panel, Pip stood back and looked at what she'd built. Not a scrap shelter thrown together from dump findings, but a real home, constructed with knowledge and skill. "It's good work," Danny said, standing beside her. "Should last decades. I couldn't have done this without you." Pip said, "Without that first roof repair, I'd still be scraping by at the dump, or maybe I wouldn't have survived that storm." "You survived before I showed up. You would have figured something out," Danny smiled. "I just fixed a leaky roof. Everything else, the job, the training, this house, that was all you." Ruth came over with Ellis and several other friends for the informal housewarming. They brought food and small gifts, things Pip never expected to have. A set of tools from Ellis, new work gloves from Ruth, a data pad loaded with advanced technical manuals from other plant workers. Standing in her new home, surrounded by friends, Pip thought about the frightened refugee dragon who had huddled in a leaking shelter 2 years ago. That dragon wouldn't recognize this. Life wouldn't believe that asking for help with a roof could lead to everything changing. Rain started falling outside. Everyone paused listening. The roof held perfectly, water running off in controlled channels exactly as designed. Not a single drip inside. Pip looked up at the solid ceiling and smiled. The little dragon's house didn't leak anymore. But more importantly, she had learned that sometimes fixing something broken, whether it was a roof or trust or hope, required letting someone else help with the repair work. And sometimes, if you were lucky, that repair work opened doors to building something even better than what you'd lost.